ramping up. As more U.S. Special Forces deploy to fight ISIS, Great Britain's parliament considers new airstrikes. Kindness and compassion. Pope Francis urges a revolution of tenderness to counter world atrocities. Offering it up, EWTN foundress Mother Angelica's health is fragile but stable despite reports to the contrary. And national traditions. Thank God it's still politically correct to decorate our nation's landmarks for Christmas. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 2nd, 2015. Good evening. We are following a developing story in San Bernardino, California, that's about an hour east of Los Angeles. Police say at least 14 people were killed, another 14 injured. The suspects reportedly drove away, and so far, none have been caught. Dozens of police officers, firefighters, and other emergency crews rushed to the scene at Inland Regional Center. It provides social services to people with developmental disabilities. Video from the scene shows police escorting people away from the area with hands in the air. Other people are taken out on stretchers to a nearby triage area. Investigators say the suspects were wearing military-style gear. It is not clear what prompted this attack. This is just the latest mass shooting in America. We are following it and will continue to have updates for you throughout our newscast. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. British lawmakers debate joining the U.S. and its allies with airstrikes against ISIS over parts of Syria. Britain's Prime Minister says the UK faces a fundamental threat to its security and needs to act now.
I have here quote after quote from leader after leader in the Gulf world begging and pleading with Britain to take part so we can take the fight to this death cult that threatens us all so much.
Prime Minister David Cameron opened a fierce debate in Parliament. It was expected to go 10 hours. He laid out why he thinks the UK needs to act now and join its allies with airstrikes against ISIS targets in Syria.
These women-raping, Muslim-murdering, medieval monsters, they are hijacking the peaceful religion of Islam for their warped ends.
Cameron has firm support, but plenty of dissenting voices from Britain's left-leaning opposition. Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn refuses to support airstrikes, calling the move a rush to war.
The claim that the superior British missiles will make the difference is actually quite hard to credit.
Corbyn demands an apology from the Prime Minister for suggesting those opposed were, quote, a bunch of terrorist sympathizers.
To brand those who plan to vote against the government as terrorist sympathizers both demeans the office of the Prime Minister and, I believe, undermines the seriousness of the deliberations we're having today.
Meanwhile, the U.S.-led coalition pounds Islamic State targets in Iraq. Iraqi forces encircled the city of Ramadi this week. They urged civilians to leave, a sign that a major operation may be imminent. A spokesman says coalition aircraft conducted 15 strikes today. 9 of them targeted ISIS positions near Ramadi. Tonight, the White House goes on the defensive, saying that establishing a special operations force in Iraq isn't a change of overall strategy. Special forces on the ground will gather intelligence, conduct raids, and may even capture leaders in both Iraq and Syria.
This is an intensification of one element of our strategy that has yielded some fruit. We're optimistic that it can advance our train, advise, and assist mission.
White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest at today's briefing. Lauren Ashburn, our new chief White House correspondent, was there. So they're not saying it's a change of strategy. What is the administration calling this step?
They're saying this is along the lines of what their strategy has been the entire time, and that we are not going to be seeing mission creep. This is simply 200 forces on the ground. And Josh said, look, there were 100,000 boots on the ground under the Bush administration.
So explain mission creep.
Oh, mission creep means that you put in a little bit of troops here, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and all of a sudden you're at war.
So what else was said at that briefing that caught your ear?
I think Guantanamo Bay, the question is, if these special forces are on the ground, what do you do if you do capture somebody? There are 50 people who are slated to move out of Guantanamo Bay, and the president isn't going to put anyone else there at that prison. So what do you do with them? Where do they go once you capture them? And the decision is going to be on a case-by-case basis.
We'll also show some of the decorations that you witnessed at the White House a little later on. It's really good to have you as a member of our team. Explain your multifaceted role for EWTN News Nightly.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm the chief White House correspondent, so I'll be spending all day at the White House at the briefing, interviewing newsmakers for the show. And then I'm also the political director, so any of the politics decisions that happen, I'll have a hand in, and we'll be covering Congress and the Supreme Court, and covering issues that are really important to Catholics: immigration, right to life, religious liberty, and hopefully helping cut through the noise on those.
Do you think we'll have any political news in 2016?
Gosh, I don't know. What do you think?
Do you plan to go on the road with some of the candidates when we get into the caucuses and the primaries?
You know, I'd like to head to the conventions. I'd like to have our team at a lot of the caucuses and primaries. I think it's really important. And what this shows is that EWTN is committed to politics and is committed to bringing our viewers the best information possible.
And I'm sure your presence at the White House, as well as at these political events, really lets others know that there's a Catholic audience here, and they're watching you, and they're taking notes.
No, it's true, and a lot of people already do know EWTN at the White House, but there are many who sort of are a little bit hazy on that. I'm going to make sure that they know exactly who we are.
And I am personally blessed that you'll be helping me with the anchor duties from time to time.
Yeah, from time to time.
I can take a little time off. I appreciate it. Lauren, welcome to the EWTN News Nightly team.
Thank you very much.
Lauren Ashburn. Well, there's more fallout from the Paris terror attacks. France closes 3 mosques, cracking down on extremists. The French Interior Minister says the mosques were closed because they were tied to radicals. Police say they seized a gun, a computer, and jihadist propaganda during a raid at a mosque outside of Paris. That mosque is also accused of operating an unauthorized school. One person was arrested, and several others are under house arrest or banned from leaving France. The terror fight leading to accusations of international corruption. Russia's deputy defense minister claims Turkey's president and his family are personally benefiting from illegal oil trading with ISIS. The accusations follow Turkey's downing of a Russian military jet near the Syrian border last week. The president of Turkey promises to resign if those accusations against him are proven. A British terror suspect plans to appeal his court sentence in Kenya. Jermaine Grant was arrested 4 years ago when investigators found explosives in his apartment. He was accused of plotting attacks against the country. He's believed to be part of a terror cell with connections to a 2005 attack in London. His lawyer says Grant insists he's innocent and his 9-year prison sentence is excessive. Pope Francis gets passionate today, calling the coexistence of wealth and misery a scandal. The Holy Father calls it an embarrassment for humanity, and not just in Africa, but everywhere. Francis reflected on his recent trip to Africa at today's audience. He says he brought a message of hope in the risen Jesus to Kenya, Uganda, and the Central African Republic. World leaders at the global climate talks in Paris hear from the Vatican Secretary of State. Cardinal Pietro Parolin mentioned the Holy Father's address to the United Nations office in Nairobi last week. There, Francis expressed hope that the Paris conference adopts a global and transformational agreement based on the principles of solidarity, justice, equality, and participation, and promoting the dignity of the human person. Talks on a massive government spending bill hit a snag today. Democrats flatly rejecting the GOP's initial offer. Republicans want to include provisions on the environment and the regulation of the financial services industry. This in addition to making it more difficult for Syrian and Iraqi refugees to enter the U.S. That bill must pass in about a week to avert a government shutdown. Well, since Friday's Colorado Springs shooting, there are new calls to disband the congressional panel investigating Planned Parenthood. Our Catherine Zeltner talks tonight with Maryland Representative Andy Harris, who sits on that panel.
Congressman, will the recent Colorado shooting derail the investigations into Planned Parenthood?
Well, I don't think so. It certainly shouldn't derail the investigations. You know, these investigations are about what the Center for Medical Progress uncovered at the nation's abortion clinics. Of course, they centered on the Planned Parenthood ones. It probably goes on with other abortionists, and we need to investigate these things.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi has called for these investigations to stop, saying that they're witch hunts. What's your response to that?
Look, anyone who's seen those tapes, those videos from the Center for Medical Progress, they know this is not a witch hunt. This is something actually going on. It's an atrocity. It's got to be investigated, whether it's legal, whether it's certainly, I don't think it's ethical, whether it's legal. We have to investigate these things, and that investigation needs to take place, and it should take place regardless of what happened in Colorado Springs. That really has nothing to do with the underlying investigation.
So what is the strategy moving forward for your select panel?
Well, we need to gather the information. We need to know, first of all, we need to know how widespread this is. I suspect that there are other abortionists who are providing this tissue. They're making money on it. It's pretty clear from those videos that there's a profit motive involved. And we need, I mean, again, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, it really doesn't make a difference. What you saw on those videos should just turn the stomachs of anyone who, looks at the dignity of human life.
Congressman, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Okay.
And amid growing concerns about the health of EWTN foundress Mother Angelica, we have a clarification tonight. Mother's Order, the Poor Clares of Perpetual Adoration, wrote in their latest newsletter, quote, "Since our last update, Mother Angelica's condition has declined and it became necessary to put her on a feeding tube." EWTN's president says the 92-year-old nun has been on a feeding tube for a few months and her health seems to be improving.
Since she's been getting the additional nutrition, she's actually been doing better. And so, unfortunately, sometimes people hear feeding tube, they think something's imminent.
Doug Keck says reports that Mother Angelica is fighting for her life are exaggerated. He says he hopes to visit her during an upcoming Advent retreat at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. Coming up, pressure mounts on Chicago's mayor to step down after an alleged year-long cover-up of a fatal police shooting. And a jury is seated in the trial of one of 6 Baltimore police officers charged in the death of Freddie Gray. Today, the church celebrates the martyr, St. Bibiana of Rome. We know little about her death, but legend says she was buried in her home, which later became a church. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. And we are learning more about today's mass shooting in California. Investigators say up to 3 gunmen opened fire at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, east of Los Angeles. Police say there are more than 24 victims, including at least 14 deaths. Workers say they locked themselves in offices when they heard the shooting start. Police believe the suspects drove away and they have not been caught. Local hospitals are treating survivors and President Obama has been briefed on the situation. The White House expresses support for Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who's struggling with fallout over a police shooting. White House spokesman Josh Earnest says Emanuel demonstrates a personal commitment to reforming that city's police department. Emanuel, who served as President Obama's first chief of staff, fired Chicago's police superintendent this week. He is forming a task force to study police accountability after the release of a video showing a white police officer shooting a black teen 16 times. That case, now more than a year old, has sparked protest and calls for Emanuel's resignation. Prosecutors say a Baltimore police officer facing charges in the death of Freddie Gray failed to help after Gray complained that he couldn't breathe. This as opening statements were made today in the trial of Officer William Porter. Charged with manslaughter, assault, and reckless endangerment, Porter is the first of 6 Baltimore City police officers to be tried in connection with the death of Freddie Gray. Gray died in police custody after being put in the back of a police van without a seatbelt. He ended up with a severe spinal injury and died a week later. That sparked protests, which led to violent clashes with police. Hundreds of people were arrested. More than 100 police officers were injured. The 6 Baltimore police officers facing charges are each being tried separately. All of them have pleaded not guilty. Porter doesn't face the most serious charges. That would be Cesar Goodson, the driver of the police van. He is charged with second-degree murder with a depraved heart. His trial is expected to begin in early January. And turning to politics tonight, a new poll shows a significant lead for the 2 top presidential candidates. Democrat Hillary Clinton now leads Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders 2-1, and Donald Trump has a 10-point lead over his nearest Republican competitors. The Quinnipiac University poll finds in a head-to-head competition, if it were held today, Clinton trumps Trump 47 to 41%. Mrs. Clinton is still under scrutiny on her personal email records from her time as Secretary of State. Recently released emails include an exchange with her daughter, Chelsea. She told her, quote, an al-Qaeda-like group launched the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Clinton released a public statement that same night condemning the attack. The FBI is still investigating the use of Clinton's private email server. Sarah Westwood, watchdog reporter at the Washington Examiner's, joining us. Have we learned anything new about the Benghazi attack from these most recent emails?
Well, these emails shed more light on how much Hillary Clinton knew about who perpetrated the attacks on the night of September 11th. We now know it's clear that she and other administration officials knew this was perpetrated by Anshar al-Sariya, that this was not a spontaneous demonstration to a YouTube clip. That's a narrative that she's maintained all along, and she's only now facing the same kind of questions that Susan Rice faced in the aftermath of the attack.
What do they show about her approach to foreign policy as our nation's chief diplomat during those years?
Well, putting Benghazi aside, what a lot of these emails show is that Hillary Clinton was almost more preoccupied with the way things looked to the press and to lobbyists and her corporate friends than to the actual effect they were having on the ground. Her email is filled with press clippings, with people weighing in on how she looked on TV, how this speech went, how that speech went. Very little substantive work on policy can be seen in her inbox, and she's claimed she did most of her work outside of email. That may be true, but the bulk of these communications shows she was very superficial about the way her staff handled these issues.
So this is out there for everybody to read. It seems kind of damaging. Do you think her campaign will take a hit?
Well, she put a lot of the worries about her emails to bed when she testified before the House Select Committee on Benghazi. You know, whether you agree or disagree with what she said in that testimony, the perception is that she walked away with a political victory. And since that time, also since Bernie Sanders said in the first Democratic debate that the American people are tired of hearing about the emails, she hasn't faced as much scrutiny about them. And now we might start to take a look at what those emails actually contain, the substance of what she said about Benghazi, the fact that she was meeting with corporate executives and donors while she was Secretary of State, rather than the nuts and bolts of just the mere fact that she was using a personal email.
She seems to be on a roll. Is there anything still in her closet that could derail her candidacy?
Well, people often forget that there's an FBI investigation that's still ongoing, and all indications are that that investigation is actually expanding. They don't have any kind of timeline. They don't have to even finish their probe before the elections. But if they do, and they do come out with some kind of indictment for Hillary Clinton, that's something obviously she'll have a hard time dismissing because it's the Obama administration's Justice Department that's looking into this.
Sarah Westwood, the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you.
Well, up next, these dark days of December are about to get a bit brighter as Christmas decorations go up in our nation's capital. I shall live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. The responsorial psalm for today's Mass on Wednesday of the first week of Advent. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Claire Lopez is Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. What is your assessment, Claire, of the administration's latest step in the war on terror?
Well, we know that they have decided to send a certain small number of special forces over to the battlefields in the former Syria to help to bolster the fight against the Islamic State. But what I have to say is that a number of operators that is that small, we're talking about a few dozen as we understand it, perhaps 50 or so, is really not going to swing the battle one way or the other. Number two is I think we have to think about where this battle really is. It's not just the Islamic State. It's not just the Middle East. That jihad, and this is a global jihad, is now among us. It is in our own societies because we already know that we have populations of Muslims in our countries, some percentage of which have answered and will answer the call to jihad.
And it is a war. In fact, this has been spoken out loud. Listen to this lively exchange between Ohio's Mike Turner and the Defense Secretary yesterday.
You've indicated that it's war. Are we winning, Mr. Secretary?
We will win.
Are we winning now?
We're going to win.
Well, Mr. Secretary, most of us on both sides of the aisle do not have confidence that you have a strategy and that you do not have a strategy based on an accurate assessment. I think your presentation here today shows a disconnect between what all the information that we're receiving and really what's being placed into the United States effort.
So, Claire, do you think that there is this disconnect, and why?
There is a disconnect, and the reason is that our leadership right now in national security, the White House, the national intelligence agencies, do not understand that we are facing a global jihad movement. Part of that is violent, like is going on in the Middle East. Part of it is not violent at the moment. And it consists of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, every bit jihadist, but welcomed into the White House by this administration and used for advisors and appointees. And so until we understand that we are looking at a global phenomenon that is both violent and, at the moment, pre-violent, and until we get at the ideology of the enemy, the threat doctrine of the enemy, which is the doctrine, law, and scripture of Islam, that is the inspiration, we will not be able to formulate an overall strategy, which is what we really need, not a whack-a-mole against the flavor of the week jihadi group that this week is Islamic State, last week was ISIS, the week before that it was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and so forth.
And we don't know yet the details, but we just had this attack in San Bernardino near Los Angeles. At least 14 may be dead. We've had so much violence. So there's this possibility that this is this jihad actually in this country, on our ground.
Absolutely, you're right, yes. We've already seen the tragedy that took place in Paris, in France, just a few short weeks ago. The jihad is now in a phase, and we have, by the way, we have the phases of the jihad movement from Al-Qaeda already published in Der Spiegel magazine in 2005. 7 phases for the conquest of the West. We are now entering phase 6, which is 2016 till 2020. It is the phase of all-out confrontation, and it is not just in the Middle East where they are desperately trying to draw us of the West into those killing fields, but it is going to be in our own societies, in our own countries.
From the Center for Security Policy, Claire Lopez, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
On a lighter side tonight, the Capitol Christmas tree has just been lit up. It lights up this dark December night. This tree is 90 years old, weighs 6,000 pounds, and our Jason Calvi was at the lighting ceremony just moments ago. Jason?
Well, Brian, the rain certainly put a damper on things tonight, and Speaker Paul Ryan did call for a moment of silence to honor the victims in California. But this is a year of firsts for this Capitol Christmas tree, which just moments ago was lit up. It's the first Christmas tree to come from Alaska, the first Lutz spruce, and it's the first time a tree has traveled not only by land, but by sea. It comes from the Chugach National Forest in Alaska. Alaskan youth and others made the ornaments that you're seeing on this tree. It'll be lit up, the People's Tree as it's called, will be lit up through January 1st. Then after that, it will be turned into mulch for the Capitol grounds. The Speaker, Speaker Ryan, his first time in this position, the first time with this honor, says that the tree is a reminder that in the darkness, God is still good. Brian?
Great message. Thank you, Jason. At Capitol Hill with the new Christmas tree, and down Pennsylvania Avenue today, the White House is now decorated for Christmas. First Lady Michelle Obama presenting the decorations earlier today. The theme this year, a timeless tradition. Throughout the White House, 62 trees, more than 70,000 ornaments. Look at all those trees. A gingerbread house in the state dining room weighs close to 500 pounds. That's a lot of gingerbread. It's beautiful. It's good to see that Christmas decorations are still okay in this country. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we leave you tonight revisiting the Capitol Christmas tree just lit this evening here in Washington. Good night, and may God bless you.